Welcome to the 2020 PAX Online panel titled Game Design for Older Adults. That means you, someday. I'm Michelle Gaudette. I am an educator at Full Sail University and learning director of Full Sail Labs, which is a division that provides tech-driven learning experiences for kids and teens. Very excited to be here with you. We're going to meet our distinguished panel in just a moment, but I'd like to lay down a few ground rules. As the monitor, it is my honor to referee the field activities and ensure each panel member gets time on the field. So I will be directing certain questions to specific panelists, and we will leave some room for additional thoughts and rebuttals if applicable. So today's focus, we have 4 key areas which we're going to try to explore, which includes intergenerational game design, older adult player preferences, user interface design for aging changes, and design collaboration with older adults. So without further ado, let's meet our panel. We have Dr. Hannah Marston, Dr. Bob Schutter, Robin Koman, Ahmad, Azadvar, and Sheri Graner. So let's begin. Each panel member will give a brief introduction for themselves, a little bit of their background, and tell us why or what connects them to this topic of game design for older adults. So let's begin. I'll hand it over to Hannah.
Hi, thank you, Michelle. My name's Hannah Marston. I have a PhD in video games and older adults, and I graduated in 2010 from Teesside University in the northeast of England in the UK. And over the last 10 years, I've been involved in a variety of research, both in Canada, the UK, and European work, looking at how video games can benefit older adults relating to physical activity, fall prevention, as well as branching out into intergenerational gaming, and also exploring how games and game design is or could benefit the Generation X.
All right, I'm Bob de Schutter. I'm a professor at Miami University. I'm also the owner of Lifelong Games, and I preside the Gerontologic Society, which is an organization that studies games for older adults. I design games with and for older adults. I research how older adults play games, and I advocate to give older adults a voice and to combat ageism. And I help other people with all of the above, I guess. So that's me.
I'm Robin Koman. I'm the department chair of the Game Design Masters at Full Sail. I'm also a PhD student studying gerontologic game design. I think what brought this to me really was my father is a late in life gamer, and seeing him in his 70s, really passionate about games, but struggling at times with aspects of design, and realizing that I myself am getting older and want to continue playing games. And so studying this field and helping to improve the design approach for older adults, I think is great future-proofing for our industry.
All right, I'm Ahmad. I'm a user research project manager at Ubisoft Sweden. I'm also a PhD student in predictive player modeling. So for me, all sorts of diversity in game users are interesting. And recently I contributed to editing a special issue on intergenerational gaming, and I'm generally interested in how different people play different type of games.
Hello, I'm Sheri Graner. I started in the game industry in 1989. I started as a writer and a designer at Origin Systems, working on the Ultima series of standalone games. I'm the founder of Women in Games International. And the idea of reaching out and broadening our market and appealing to different types of audiences has been a passion of mine for a very long time. I have watched our audience broaden out somewhat, and I'd like to see us continue to grow. I'm particularly interested in looking at the baby boomer audience. They are all heading into retirement. They have some disposable income. They're all mostly a little tech savvy. I think that we're missing a bet if we don't reach out to that audience. And so something very important to me.
Wonderful, thank you for the introductions. So let's begin with a defining question. And this is the topic of designing games for older adults in and of itself. I'm going to begin by handing this over to Rob with a follow-up with Hannah. What do you feel, or better yet, why is the topic of designing games for older adults so critical right now? Bob?
Oh, Bob, I thought you said Rob.
Oh, Bob.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah. I mean, I think it's an extremely critical topic right now, honestly. I think, you know, we already hinted a little bit at it. It's going to be a huge audience, for one. I think I've been studying in this field for about since 1999. At that point, I think it was about 8 or 9% of people over 50 that were playing games at the time. We've seen it get to the point, it depends on what study that you're looking at, but that we are 40, 50% of older adults that are playing games now. And this is a huge audience. In fact, I think the AARP just launched a study where they found that over the last half year, so I think this is from the summer of 2019 until the end of 2019, that older adults spent $3.5 billion on video games. So, you know, this is an enormous market that is out there. For me personally, I always feel, and I've talked about this at length as well, that older adults are not always treated as fairly. A lot of the games that have been marketed towards older adults are either brain games or fitness games, and it's all about you have to be young again. And I always saw an issue with that personally. So I think both of those things go hand in hand. I think the industry is going to get interested in this field right now, but it's critical because there's also a couple of diversity issues that need to be addressed at the same time. And if we can do that now, I think this is the perfect time to do it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Hannah, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, you know, I agree with what Bob's just said. You know, Bob and I've been in this area since 2005, and I can sense, you know, older people in gaming. It's when I first started, you know, I would invite people to take part in my workshops and be like, I don't play video games, and they were rather standoffish. They didn't see the point. They didn't see how it could benefit them. And in 2010 or 2009 into 2010, you could see the brain training games coming out onto market, and it was, you know, kind of use it or lose it, and that underlying tone of ageism. And at the moment, and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, I haven't seen much of the ageism or ageist views coming out yet. But you know, they were there 10, 15, 20 years ago, using the term silver surfers, silver gamers. You know, some people don't like that term. But what is beneficial and what can be good for people in later life is also playing games that they themselves may want to play based on their hobbies, interests, what they want to do. But they may also want to play with their children, grandchildren as well. And I always use the example of Christmas Day, or you know, you could say Thanksgiving, where the family get together, multiple generations, and an older person, a grandparent, may not actually play, but they'll be interested in what's going on in the room. And you know, the using of a gamepad, they might not be able to use it because of issues with their dexterity, but it is being engaged with everybody in the room, and learning and understanding and being inclusive when it comes to game design, and having those exact users in that room and having feedback from the very beginning, not when it comes to testing at the end. And that's where games aimed not just at older adults, but across all different age groups, that's where it's important.
Wonderful, thank you. And some great points are being brought up here. I like especially looking at the considerations being brought in early on, as opposed to waiting until just the testing phase. So that's a great segue into the next question, and thinking about the actual design considerations for older adults. So I'm going to start with you, Robin. What are some best practices for user design when designing games specifically for older adults?
I think the critical thing for me that I've found in discussing this topic at different conferences over the past few years is that there are a lot of developers in our industry And I think, you know, the average age of a game creator has remained pretty static. The average game creator is between 28 and 35, but a lot of them aren't aware of the typical cognitive and physiological and sensory changes that happen as people age. And so I think if, you know, and it's different for every person as they age, but if we could help them to understand the way motor control changes, the way attention and focus changes, the way vision changes and hearing changes, we can make better, more accessible design choices for older adults. And so I think that's really the most critical thing, is just the industry being open to being educated about those differences, so that we aren't accidentally eliminating what, as Bob pointed out, is a very lucrative audience of players that we could be taking advantage of.
Agreed. And I'm especially being a Gen Xer, you know, this is a crucial topic for me right now. So Sheri, I'd like to pass this over to you now to add some thoughts regarding best practices for this type of design.
A real interesting question. I think one of the things that has happened, and I've noticed happening before, is as you mentioned, we do tend to want to pigeonhole new markets into areas and groups and say, okay, there, we took care of that. We made a game for them. And for the older gamer, it does tend to be brain games or games you can play with a grandchild, or they're okay, so we've taken care of them, so we don't have to think about that anymore. And I really hope that as designers, we can open up our thinking beyond that and take some of the things that Robin was talking about into consideration. When we're just designing our traditional games, let's look at our interfaces. Let's look at our tutorials, learning structures. Let's look at how we're presenting our UIs. How are we presenting this information? Is it accessible to this particular market segment, rather than saying, oh, they'll be happy just learning the brain game stuff? It's bigger than that. The market is bigger than that. We cannot define it as a genre. It's not the genre of brain games. It's not the genre of games you play with your grandkids. It's a new market for all the games. So we need to be looking at implementing these practices into every game that we're designing, so that we simply are opening up our gates wider to let the bigger market into our titles. So I would really stress that we're looking at changing or adding design paradigms to everything we're doing, not just, look, you know, brain game, older person. We got to think beyond that if we want to really tap that market.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to open the floor if anyone else would like to add thoughts regarding best practices. All right, Hannah?
Yeah, just following on from what Sheri said, you know, you need to understand what the older gamer wants from a game. They might not be a gamer. They might be somebody who's heard of video games, but are a little bit reluctant. And they may want to play. And how do they want to play? Do they want to play via a mouse or via a gamepad, gesture? We have voice these days. All these different elements of communication in a game can be now developed, as opposed to, you know, 15, 20, 25 years ago. And, you know, just thinking back to some of my research from 2012, 2013, you know, opening up, having workshops and asking, you know, getting groups of people together, different genders, different age cohorts within the baby boomers, within Gen X, and those older than the baby boomers, those who are 75 and older, because we know that people are living longer, the longevity of the population, you know, people are living into their hundreds. What is it that they want? And get them to experience holding a gamepad and seeing, you know, for example, Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto or something really out the box.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that a bit. I was actually thinking what Sheri said as well. I've been doing these clubs, if you will, where I brought in older adults to come play video games with me, just very casual. Some people are avid gamers, other people are not. And it's really fascinating just to see them interact with all these genres out there, because the audience itself is extremely heterogeneous. And you would expect sometimes that certain things are going to go well, and then they don't. And the silliest example there was, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Hearthstone, the card game from Blizzard, similar to Magic the Gathering. I figured that could be a good game to play with this group, and you know, I booted it up and we started playing, and I expected them to get get going with it really quickly because it's, you know, a very well designed game, and obviously Blizzard does a lot of work on their usability and user experience. But when we started playing, I had 3 or 4 people in the group, let's say there were 20 people in the room, who actually didn't get through the tutorial and who got stuck trying, because you have to fight a couple of monsters, I guess, and they just got stuck in the tutorial and they lost the tutorial. And I was like, how is this happening? You know? So for me, that was more recently one of the eye-opening moments where you feel that even when the industry is doing everything right in terms of usability and user testing and all those types of things, if older adults are not being taken into account, you're going to run into these issues over and over and over again. And it was just fascinating. And since you guys were mentioning things that related to it, I felt I should mention that.
Wonderful. Ahmad, do you have any thoughts to add before we move forward?
I just wanted to emphasize on that point that it's like, it's not just that the UI or let's say the type of game is not designed for older adults, but sometimes the way that we give them feedback. In a study that we recently did, most older adults complain that the game don't make them feel competent, and like younger generations rated those a lot higher. Although, like from the game metrics, we saw that actually Gen-Xers are a lot more competent in the game, but they don't see themselves as much. So I think some of these feedback systems are not even designed to tell them how good they are at what they're doing.
That's an excellent point. And Ahmad, I know you specialize in optimal analysis of user experience and specifically paying attention to how to engage all ages in virtual worlds. So I'd love for you to provide some thoughts on differences in preferences and play styles based on generation.
So the first thing that in one of our most recent studies we did in this July that came up was that older adults don't necessarily want to play social, right? So they tend to select games that are solo play and mostly focused on narrative of the options that, of course, will be provided for them. And also, they spend more time in the game. They spend more time per day, almost an hour more than Gen Z per day. But their percentage of social play was the lowest. And they also complained that some games makes players go through co-op play or matchmaking that they did not necessarily want to do. Another thing that came up with it was the content gating behind, challenges or, like you have to spend this much in the game to get to that next phase. So these gatings that are usually skill-based or based on, quick interactions are, stopping older adults to enjoy the full experience, usually the more narratively related ones. Even on those, there are some that have, narrative lines that don't really fit with them. So like they complain that the rich narrative that other entertainment medium has, game designers usually don't pay attention to.
It is intriguing and interesting thinking about what different generations want, what they're looking for, and how much time they're willing to spend in a gameplay experience. So that's a good shift over into the idea of what is intergenerational gaming, right? The act of getting the different generations playing games together. Myself, I have children that range from 29 to 17 and a grandson who's 4. And I feel like I have my own research, institute when we all come together to try to play games. And so I'm going to start with you, Hannah. If you could please speak to the importance of intergenerational gaming and how might we improve the ability to get gamers of different generations playing together.
So there's a little bit of research coming out there and has been for the last 5 years, 10 years tops. I think to encourage intergenerational gaming is, it's what we've been talking about already, figuring out what older people want. Not all older people want to play Call of Duty or first-person shooter games because they don't like that particular genre. But then the younger kids, their children, grandchildren, they may not want to play casual games. You know, it's figuring out what everybody wants to play. And I think as well, you know, we talk about engagement, you know, the gamepad for some older people. I know in some of my older research, you know, when they were playing on the PlayStation 2, they had problems doing multiple button pressing. And, you know, if you imagine Thanksgiving or Christmas Day, you know, people, the older generation who have issues engaging with a gamepad, they could become frustrated, you know, and then that causes friction, doesn't it? And the younger kids may become frustrated, and it's learning, isn't it? And learning amongst the family or amongst those generations that you know, that there could be issues, and learning, you know, press this button, this is how I did it, and just passing that knowledge along. You know, it's not about just winning, is it? Although we all play to win, but it's sharing that knowledge.
Wonderful. All right, I'm opening up the floor again. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to intergenerational gaming? All right, Robin, please.
To make sure I remember to unmute myself, it's like my greatest fear. So, well, not my greatest, but in a Zoom. So when we bring up intergenerational gaming, I think of, just as Hannah has described, a Christmas morning. My parents came over. At the time, my mom probably would have been around 72. And I've never gotten her to play a video game, ever. We had the Wii, and we had Wii bowling turned on when they got there. And my mom used to bowl competitively. And when she saw the controller with one large button, I was able to convince her to play. And just in that teaching moment, as Hannah described, I taught her how to hold the controller. She bowled a 260. She trashed the rest of us. And every time we got together after that, she brought up, hey, can we play that bowling game? And so to see someone who never had an interest in interacting with video game technology to embrace that moment, I think was in part the setting, was in part the relative simplicity of the control scheme, in part the familiarity of the activity, to allow her to recapture this nostalgic time from her youth when she used to go out with her friends and play this game. It was a lovely moment. And those are the kinds of moments I think about recapturing when I think about intergenerational play. My big concern is loneliness. It's a real problem with adults as they age. And if games can do something to help lessen that, I think that's a very powerful thing.
Michelle, you're muted.
Yep, I pulled the mistake in Zoom. Thank you, Robin. Hannah, please add to the conversation.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with what Robin's just said. And, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're, you know, some of us have spent several months on our own in lockdown. Some people have been playing games online, you know, just for that social connection and to reduce social isolation. And I think, you know, if people have been living together and there's been, you know, certainly 2 generations, maybe multiple generations in a house during this unprecedented global experience, you know, the shared experience of, you know, board games as well as video games, passing that knowledge on. But, you know, with Robin talking about her mum and bowling, you know, what is nice with the Wii, and what I noticed when I was conducting my research back in 2008, you know, people who may have, we all kind of know how to play tennis, even though we're not pros. We've watched it on the TV, or golf even, you know, and by holding the Wiimote, you know, ready to swing the club, or, you know, with the tennis racket, we have those existing mental models. And for somebody who's unfamiliar with how kind of gamepads work, but they know how to play golf and tennis, we all kind of do. We're all kind of professionals in our own fantasy world. You know, they can still be part of that gameplay experience in their own living environment. And I think video games, with looking at, you know, from not only ages, but also how people have used them from the standpoint of the pandemic is also a good way forward for future research, not only for academia, but for industry as well.
Excellent. So oh, is there another hand? No?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to add, if anybody familiar with my player classification for older adults that I published a while ago, compensators is actually one of the main groups that I found in the research. And these are people that are mostly playing because they have a lack of social interaction in their life permanently. So there were so many stories in that study of older adults that just really were in their house way before the pandemic happened, and were going through severe episodes of loneliness. And I found that a lot of them found a way to overcome that through MMORPGs, and in particular, Second Life was very popular with that group. And I was actually backed up later on from another study as well with, I think, about 2,000 participants. Quantitatively, that Second Life is extremely popular amongst older adults. So if you put 1 and 2 together, it really shows how much potential there is there, and what intergenerational play could add to the lives of people that find themselves in that kind of situation.
Okay, so this opens up so many additional questions and thoughts, but I think one of the big key areas is really thinking about, where do we go right from here? Because we've seen some of the analysis, we have extensive research that many of you have been a part of. So let's shift the focus now to the game development industry itself. If we are aware that we have, this need, we have these audiences, we have, the ability to perhaps bring together these generations to play games, but we see the differences and preferences. Let's look to the question about designers over the age of 50 being a part of that development process. I'm going to start with you, Sheri. You've been designing, as you said, since the late 80s, and you've seen many changes in the industry. Taking careful consideration of things like women in development, gender inclusivity in games, intergenerational play. So what are your thoughts on this specific topic about having designers over the age of 50?
It's a real interesting question, because I have found myself kind of at the forefront of a couple of these movements going in. When I started in the industry, I was one of very few women in the industry. It was a standard joke. It's like, how am I going to find you at the CGDC? I'd be like, I'll be one of 6 women there. You'll find me. Like, I used to introduce myself to other women in the restroom if I found them there. It's like, who are you? Oh. And so now I find myself kind of at the forefront of this as a designer over 50. And I'm finding myself, again, there's no other designers there over 50. So I'm finding myself kind of once again having to stand up in meetings and go, okay, what if our player is over 50? Used to be, what if our player is female? Well, now it's, what if our player is over 50? And it's almost like I have found in working with and trying to keep the concept of alternate markets and minority audiences in the mind of the development team. It's almost like you have to be an ombudsman for that group. Teams with me coming onto it, they know that I'm going to be saying something about, well, what if your player is female? Do we really want to put that chainmail bikini out there? Let's think about that. But now I'm saying, okay, but what if our player is over 50? Do we really want to make the only source of communication voice? Because that can be a barrier. Now, you can tell an older person's voice. Is that going to, bring any kind of derision or any kind of attacks on them for being an older person playing the game? Same thing if you're female. Your voice shows up in there, you become a target. If you're older, does it become a target? Maybe we need to think about this. Is really the only way we can do this is with a controller? Can we look at maybe a keyboard situation? Can we look at something besides WASD for once? WASD is really not that intuitive. So it's a matter of continuing to be the ombudsman for that minority audience and keeping them in mind. And I continually am having to poke my teams. Hey, what about this audience? I believe that we're going to see more designers that are over 50, because I'm already seeing designers that are in their 30s and are coming into their 40s. So I believe it's coming, which is good, because the more representation, of course, that you have in the design team, the better, the broader your design is going to be. That can be said for, we want all minorities represented on our teams. So I think we're headed in a good direction, but at this point in time, you continually have to remind I have to remind my developers, well, what if the player is colorblind? I mean, what is that, like 8% of the male target audience is colorblind, and I still have to remind them about, hey, did you run the filters on that? So having somebody there and keeping it in mind it's almost on a checklist. Remind the team, what if they're older? What if they're female? What if they're colorblind? Let's have a checklist we run through. So it's really good to realize that you're going to end up being an ombudsman if you're there. But I think we're going to be better. I think we've got more older designers coming.
I agree, and I think that's a wonderful thing. All right, Ahmad, I see your hand is up. Please share.
Yes, so like just to follow up on that, as user researchers, we usually also get requests to run tests, and they come up with the criteria that the participant has to be like between 18 and 25-year-old, because that's who we are making the game for. And like Sheri mentioned, it's more of an accessibility issue first, that not everyone is perceiving or like that tech savvy or have the same ideas or like cognitive maps of how things work in a video game. The same thing, first time I gave my dad the controller, he couldn't move the camera of a third person game, and like we spent 45 minutes just to getting that thing fixed. And after that it was very smooth, and he could actually enjoy the game, and he would like stand somewhere and like look at the pictures on the wall, which is something that probably a younger gamer would never do. And like people spend hours and hours on those. But other than the accessibility issue, what comes to mind is then, because we do also prototype testing and like very early on testing. So I think, and Hannah can back me up on this, but this collaborative design that like bringing in the older adults early on and putting the logic of the game in front of them, and see if that makes sense for them to, like, for example, control camera with one stick and the stance of the player with another. Just wanted to add that.
Oh, thank you. Hannah, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to quickly follow up. I can't emphasize enough the need for inclusivity and bringing in older women, older men, just bring everybody in and let the designers who are in their 20s and early 30s actually hear what the older people have issues with. Because I think until they actually see it for themselves, I mean, they can read the books, they can read the papers, they can go to conferences, but until they hear a person in their 60s and 70s say, do you know what? I can't do that action. I'm partially sighted, or I can't hear, and I don't think that they're really going to get it. I might be wrong, but the whole inclusivity has to be there from the very beginning right through to the end, and even marketing as well.
Bob, excuse me.
Oh,
I want to change your name for some reason.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, I obviously agree everything what Hannah was just saying. You want to bring older adults into your lab, or as early as you possibly can in your design process. And I just wanted to add to that, it's not always just a matter of accessibility. While accessibility is extremely important in the design projects, co-design type of projects that I've done myself with older adults, I often found that I saw a lot of unexpected things that weren't just, it's about accessibility, but also like you could make the game better if you do this or that, or don't make the game too easy for me. Like one of the things that I felt was something for me that was kind of paradigm shifting is when I stopped thinking about older adults as like I need to accommodate them versus I want to empower them. And as a designer, that makes a really big difference, because the older adults that I work with, once they get an interface that works for them, we're good to go, and they want a proper challenge. So you can, it's a very specific and sometimes difficult to walk balance that you want between your accessibility and between providing a real challenge, because they're not playing this game just to be patronized or anything. They want a proper game a lot of the times as well. But you need to get past the accessibility barriers first, and it's a very fertile ground for game development and coming up with great ideas for games.
Excellent points. All right, Sheri, I'll let you add some closing thoughts to that question.
Yeah, it's very important though at this point in time when you're working with a dev team is you have to make sure the dev team is open to those ideas and accepting of those ideas. That sounds funny, but there are so many times when you go talk to that dev team and they're like, well, here's our audience. Well, what about these audience? Oh, yeah. But they think, oh, yeah, if we're going to have older people, we got to make it easy for them. If we're going to have women, we're going to have about lipstick and makeup if we're going to do women. No, you've got to make it accessible to them without pandering to them and patronizing them. They're a serious audience. They're just as competitive. They're just as interested in playing. We just have to make it accessible to them. And the dev team has to be open to that. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
It's a really valid point. There's so many great aspects to this discussion, and we could venture off into any one direction and probably spend hours there, right? But we do, have to be mindful of our closing time here. So as we're looking to the future, and you've all brought up some very interesting points and considerations, things that we know and things that we need to consider and put in place as we move forward. But the final thought, the final inquiry here is strategies, techniques, specific things that should and could be put in place outside of what you've shared already that will help us plan better for the future. We looked at analysis, also the research, and I want to point out something that came through Hannah's research, which I thought was very valid, is you mentioned about this double-edged sword, right, where we currently position that, the rapid pace of development and our dependence on smart technology creates this isolated disadvantage, right? But if we are creating technologies that are geared toward aging population, then that can contribute to more comfort and more dignity. And you've all kind of hit on that today so far. So I would like for each of you to add to this final thought about specific planning for the future, strategies, techniques, specific things that can be put in place so all developers within the industry can be mindful of this. And I guess I'll go ahead and I'll hand it over to anybody itching to go. All right, Robin, take it away.
So for those of us who are designers, something that we talk about a lot is the introduction practice mastery pattern, right? Where we introduce mechanics or challenges and we give players a chance to practice and improve at those, and then build in moments where we're expecting them to show mastery. And so if I could get the industry forward thinking about anything in addition to what we've already talked about, it would be realizing that there are differences in memory and retention that happen as we age. And so there may be differences in pacing that we need to take on. There may be differences in repetition that we need to take on. And I will forever and always advocate just to have a menu option where players can turn tooltips back on. Because if they have to walk away from a game for a few weeks and come back to it, I don't want them to have to start over. I want to give them access to tools that will allow them to jump back in, hopefully right where they were when they left off, and still be successful.
Great, thank you, Robin. I'm going to hand this over to Hannah. Your thoughts?
So I have two main thoughts. The first one, I think, for dev teams, designers to go into the environment of older people, assisted living, and actually sit down for an hour, a couple of hours, or half a day, maybe once a month or something, and actually just listen and talk to the older people and see how they experience in their world technology and whether there's any games and stuff like that going on. And secondly, I think more close working with academia, stakeholders, older people with the industry, and kind of seeing research that the likes of Bob and I have done being fed into companies as a means of bridging working relationships. And I know, companies, they're on tight deadlines and stuff, but I think we can all benefit one way or another, and you know, through respective expertise, knowledge and skills, we can all benefit from this to for the greater good, really.
Excellent. These are some wonderful points. Let's hand it over to Bob. Let's hear what you have to say.
Well, you know, I'll second what Hannah already said. I think working closely with older adults is important. And like Sheri was saying earlier, I mean, 1% of the developers in the industry are over 50. That's how low the number is. So you need to bring those people in. To give you an example, I don't want this to sound like a plug, but I just worked on an indie game that actually did well and won a couple of awards, but that's all because of my grandmother, because I sat down with her, talked about her life, and it ended up being this game. And it's about her World War II experiences as a 14-year-old girl in Belgium, and that would never have happened if I wouldn't, you know, have been doing this type of work. And that's just how fruitful it can be to just work with older adults closely on this topic and see where it can lead you.
Great. Ahmad, thoughts?
Yeah, being closer to game development teams, I think if they just go a little bit further than the already established ideas of, you know, casual gamers and core gamers, or that, you know, the more you spend time in the game, the more engaged you are with it, and those kind of perceptions, and just being open that different people are approaching the same product and the same environment very differently. They want different things from it, and just respecting that. And again, like everyone else said, inviting them in to hear what they're saying is all I can ask for.
Wonderful additional points there. Sheri.
Me. I would say understand what market is that you want to include and make a commitment to it. And this has to happen from the top down. It has to be everybody. They have to understand why they're doing it. This means we can be very mercenary about this. We can talk about the kind of disposable income we're talking about tapping into. We can talk about the kind of time that the audience has to spend. We can talk about their interest. Is there interest in these? And I'm sure that there is. We've got studies that say there are. Bring that to the forefront. Talk about this, because you're going to have to sell this idea from the top down, and make sure there's a commitment to addressing that audience when they're laying out their game design plans and laying out their scheduling. Because, you know, given the choice, we all want to take the easy route. And the easy route is what we already know how to do. We already know how to make games for the 18 to 35-year-old, you know, straight young white male. I mean, we know how to do that. We've been doing it for 30 years. If we're going to tackle a new audience, we're going to tackle this new market, we have to make a commitment to it. We have to be serious about it. It has to be from the top down. So I would say, arm yourself, know what the market is, know how big the market is, know what you're going after, and make a commitment to reach out to that market. Then start setting up, bringing the audience in, set up some focus groups, set up some conversations, look at what they're already playing, and treat it like you would any other market that you're going into, and treat it with respect.
Excellent point there to end on. Wow, so much contributed to this discussion today. I truly wish that we had more time to field additional questions. On a personal note, I'm super excited that this topic is being explored, and it is so important to many of you, researchers and developers out there, because I do fit the demographic, and I've been raised on games, and I look forward to continuing that process into my late adulthood. So I want to thank everyone on the panel for being here today and sharing your wisdom and your grace with us. Before we wrap up, are there any final burning thoughts or reminders that anyone would like to gift our audience? Yes,
I got one really quickly. One of the things that I've also noticed is there are a lot of older adults that are into the games that you wouldn't really expect, but they have no way to learn about them. So as a final note, I don't think we really mentioned curation, but I don't know exactly what journalistic outlets there would be that would really appeal to the audience at this time, but there is a definite need there, I would say, from what I've seen in the research, because I've had so many games that I've played with older adults, like Journey or Minecraft and things like that, that are absolutely a success, but a lot of them never hear of them.
Thank you. I appreciate that thought, Robin?
That's really such a great point, Bob. I mean, honestly, like I'm passionate about this subject and I hadn't thought about that need for not just journalistic sources, but sources that hit the modes of consumption that older adults tend to use. I just wanted to quickly ask, would you mind sharing the name of your game just for folks who might be watching who would like to see that or experience that?
Well, it's actually behind me on the screen. It's Brukel, Brukel. I have to spell it out because it's originally it's the place where the farm is at, where she grew up in. So it's very Belgian in its pronunciation. It's actually Brukel, but I have to anglicize it a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just one other thing, and thinking about Hannah and Sheri, and the chapter that the two of you wrote together on older adult female gamers, I do want to mention for those of you who are like, yes, we should target older adult gamers, there are more women than men, and more women gaming over the age of 50 than kids between the ages of 12 and 18. So just something to keep in mind.
And they have money to spend.
Yeah, they do, and time.
I just have to add to that for many years, I had this trick with my kids. I would hint to them games to put on their Christmas list just so I could get them for myself. And I'll continue to do so. I can't look too selfish, right? Wonderful. So thanks again to our panelists. Thanks to our audience for listening in. And we wish you all happy gaming as you move forward.